The flicker in the dark. You don't have to go far. Just turn back time, not by centuries, not by kingdoms, not even by bones turned to dust. Go further, back before pyramids, before stone tools, before names, back to a world that had no fire. The sky was the same, the stars still burned, but the ground was cold, the earth was a sleeping beast, and we were just its shivering dream. There were no hearths, no smoke, no glow behind bark huts, no ember to follow in the night, only darkness. It wasn't the kind of darkness we know now, the flick of a light switch, the dim hum of a screen. This was darkness alive, thick, breathing, ancient. It moved like a predator. It swallowed sound. It pressed against the skin like wet fur, and inside it, early humans, Homo erectus, Homo habilis, the first quiet tribes sat still. Not predators, not hunters, just witnesses. They curled in caves, their backs to the stone, eyes wide, ears straining. The night was not safe. It was not gentle. It was filled with things they could not see. Eyes that glowed and teeth that glinted, wolves that crept close, cats that didn't roar, serpents that hissed from the brush. We were not kings, we were not gods, we were prey. And still we watched, and still we listened. Because even then, even in the fear, something inside us refused to turn away. A flicker, a hunger, not for food, not for safety, for understanding. There are no words left from that age, no poems carved into stone, but they left other clues. Charcoal smudges, scrapes on walls, teeth worn down not from eating but from whispering. Because in the dark, even before language, they told stories, in grunts, in gestures, in dreams, of what lay beyond the fireless sky, of spirits in the trees, of beasts too big to fight but too beautiful to forget. And then, one day the sky tore open, not metaphor, lightning. A jagged scream across the heavens, and where it touched earth, something new was born. Fire. Not a spark, not a candle, a roaring, cracking, growling creature of light. It leapt from tree to tree. It consumed. It danced. It screamed. And we ran. The first time we saw fire, we didn't celebrate. We fled, because fire was alive and it did not love us. But someone stayed. Somewhere in that ancient tribe a figure stood still. We'll never know their name, their face, only that they didn't turn away. They watched the flames, not with terror, but something deeper. Not curiosity, not awe, something older, recognition. Because fire was not foreign, it was not strange, it was what we had always feared and always needed. Fire wasn't just warmth, it was witness, it was mirror, it was soul. For years we didn't know what to do with it. We followed where it burned, waited for trees to fall, waited for the ground to cool, waited to pick through the ashes. We carried burning branches from place to place, not to cook, not yet, to hold back the dark. The first fire wasn't a tool, it was a guardian. And in the glow of those first flames we became something else, no longer just a creature with a stick, but a creature with remembrance. The firelight flickered across stone walls, and shadows moved. Not animals, not the flames, us. We moved differently now. We danced. Not to celebrate, but to remember we painted. Not to decorate, but to preserve the antelope that escaped us, the leopard that hunted us, the gods we imagined in smoke. The dark no longer swallowed our stories. We lit them. We used to huddle together in silence. Now we leaned in, a face glowing with fire, hands weaving through air, and others listening, not to instructions, but to legends. That was the moment we changed. Because fire didn't just keep us warm. It didn't just scare off the wolves. It did something no claw, no fang, no cave ever could. It made time real. With fire, we didn't just survive the night. We remembered it. We passed it on. And in the passing, we became human. They say Homo sapiens means wise man, but the first wisdom was not in the spear, not in the hunt, it was in the flame. Because with flame came thought, and with thought came language, and with language came legacy. The wolves still howled, the cats still crept, the cold still bit. But now there was a circle of warmth, a centre, a symbol. We had found the beating heart of civilization. Not in stone, not in bone, but in fire. You can still feel it, every time you stare into a campfire, every time a candle flickers during a storm, every time the power goes out and you light a match. It's not nostalgia, it's not memory, it's instinct. Something buried deep inside you, older than names, stirs. Because before the first god, before the first city, before the first war, there was flame, and flame was the first miracle. Not because it gave us power, but because it gave us something greater. Awareness. We were alive. We were fragile. And the world was vast. But we were not alone anymore. The night could no longer devour us, because now we had a tongue of the sun in our hands, and with it we would not just survive. We would tell stories. We would become memory. We would become more. And it all began with a flicker, a whisper in the dark, a fire that saw us before we saw ourselves. The first spark. Before there were torches, before there were hearths, before there was even a word for fire, there was only the sky and its fury. It did not come gently. It cracked. It shattered the heavens. It screamed. Lightning. Not a flicker. Not a whisper. But a jagged spear hurled by the sky gods, crashing into the bones of the earth. Trees exploded. Air turned white. And for a single breathless moment, everything froze. Even time. Then came the roar. Fire. Uninvited. Untamed. A wild thing born not from man, but from the rage of the clouds. It leapt through the forest like it had legs. It howled like it had lungs. It devoured like it had hunger. And it was not ours. We did not create it. We did not understand it. We could not touch it. But we saw it. And we remembered. Picture it. A small band of early humans, not yet Homo sapiens. Call them ancestors if you must. But in truth, they were something softer, something still becoming. They stood at the edge of the clearing, bare feet pressed into blackened earth, eyes wide with something that wasn't quite fear and wasn't quite worship. Their world had been quiet, predictable, cold. This was new, too new. The fire danced before them. It cracked and hissed. It threw shadows taller than trees, and it painted their faces in orange and blood. They didn't reach for it, not yet. Because what stood before them was not warmth, not hope, but divinity. It came from nowhere. It killed trees. It screamed from the mountains and rained down upon the earth. It was everything the old gods were. And yet it was here, not up there. It could be seen, heard, felt, but not touched. Those who tried ran. Some bore the burn marks on their hands for days, some never returned. Fire was a spirit that could feed, and if it could feed, it could be hungry. We learned that quickly, too quickly. The first fires were accidents, a dry forest after weeks of sun, a single bolt of lightning, a tree igniting from within, a bird caught mid-flight falling with wings aflame, or the breath of a mountain, a volcanic moan deep beneath the crust, lava bursting from the skin of the earth, trees turned to ash, skies turned red, the air itself glowing. These were not stories, these were lessons, because the fire did not come quietly, it announced itself, it demanded to be seen, and those who survived it, they did not forget. For thousands of years, fire remained a visitor. It came when it wished. It left destruction in its wake. But even destruction leaves behind clues. Among the ashes, warmth. Among the smoke, light. Among the fear, fascination. We watched it, from a distance, from caves and crevices, from behind the safety of stone. We did not speak of it. We did not name it. But we began to follow it. A tree falls to fire. A clearing opens. New plants bloom in its place. Animals flee the blaze. We trail behind and find easy prey. Charred bones break softer. Cooked meat digests quicker. Ashy roots taste sweeter. We were learning, not how to make it, but how to read it. Somewhere on some forgotten night, a fire lingered longer than usual. Perhaps it clung to a fallen log. Perhaps it smouldered in a hollow tree. Perhaps it flickered in the wake of a passing storm. And someone stayed behind. While others moved on, this one did not. They crouched, they watched, not with hunger, not with fear, but with something new, a hand extended, not to touch, but to test. Dry grass, crackling twigs, a spark jumps. And for the first time, fire answered. It wasn't a blaze, it wasn't a storm, it was a flicker, a timid orange whisper. But that was all it took. They carried it, not in hands, but in husks. Bundles of bark, hollow stones, bones filled with glowing dust. They protected it with moss and moss with spit. They did not know what it was, but they knew what it meant. Not just warmth, not just light, but promise. A promise that the night no longer had to win. A promise that the cave no longer had to be silent. A promise that the story no longer had to die with the mouth that spoke it. And still fire remained a stranger. It was not mastered. It was pleased. It was coaxed like a skittish animal. Too much wind it vanished. Too much fuel it raged. Too little respect it burned. We treated it like we treated gods, with offerings, with rituals, with caution. In those early years, fire was not daily. It was seasonal. It was earned. When it arrived, it became sacred. Tribes marked its place in circles of stone, danced around it with painted faces, told stories to it as if it were a listener, because maybe it was. Fire gave us not just survival, but theatre myth ceremony. We did not yet farm, we did not yet write, but around fire we performed. We became more than animals, we became witnesses to our own becoming. Generations passed. Fires were passed like heirlooms, from mother to daughter, from hunter to scout. But always from sky to hand. We still had not made it ourselves. Not yet. And so we watched the skies, prayed for storms, feared them and longed for them. Because fire was still not ours. It was a gift. A dangerous, wild, uncontrollable gift. And still we reached for it. Not because we wanted power, but because we saw in it something of ourselves. A creature that could destroy or protect, that could warm or burn, that could wander or stay. Fire was not just heat. It was choice. It was will. And so it became the first thing we revered, before sun gods, before river gods, before the sky itself there was fire. When we sing of ancient miracles, we forget this one. We praise the wheel, the bow, the ship, the plough, but none of them could exist without what came first. Before we could travel the seas, we needed to harden the boat. Before we could forge metal, we needed heat. Before we could cook, cure, preserve, we needed a flicker. And before we could dream aloud, we needed a flame to listen. So remember this. Fire was never a tool. It was never a thing to be owned. It was a spirit, a teacher, a mirror. We did not invent it. It found us. And when it did, it showed us what it meant to change. It would be millennia before we learned to make it ourselves, to strike stone on stone, to birth it with our own hands. But none of that mattered yet. Because the first fire didn't come from flint. It came from the sky. A scream, a crack, a falling tree, and a world forever different. We didn't build it, but we remembered it. And that, more than anything, was the true first spark. The taming of flame. It began not with matches, not with sparks, not with invention, but with faith. The belief that fire could be carried, that it could be held without burning, that this living, breathing thing could be protected, not feared. Fire wasn't tamed in a moment. It was welcomed over generations. And that welcome changed everything. There was no strike of flint, no clever hands rubbing sticks, not yet. There was only borrowed flame stolen from lightning-blasted trees, from the cracked lip of a volcano, from the smouldering edge of a wildfire. We could not create fire, but we learned how to keep it alive. The trick wasn't to make fire, it was to stop it from dying. We learned to cradle coals in the hollow of a log. We wrapped embers in dried moss and layered them in bark. Some used the husks of gourds, others packed animal dung around glowing cinders, creating little wombs of warmth. Children carried fire. Elders guarded it. And when the tribe moved, the fire moved too. This was more than utility. It was ritual. It was sacred. The carrier of flame was not just a servant. They were chosen. They were trusted with the tribe's most fragile god. A flicker of sun walking across the earth. If the flame died, the night returned. The cold crept back in. The predators circled closer. So we learned how to tend it, to feed it like an infant, to whisper to it like a secret, to shelter it from rain, from wind, from time. And in doing so, we tamed something far more wild than fire. We tamed ourselves. There is a cave in South Africa, where the ceiling still glows with ancient soot. Wonderwork Cave. Buried beneath meters of sediment, scientists found ash, burned bones, charred plants, all more than 1 million years old, not scorched by wildfire, not left behind by lightning. No, this ash was placed. This fire was tended, a hearth, primitive, small, eternal, dug into the very belly of the earth. It wasn't chaos, it was domesticity. Fire had come inside, and that changed everything. Until then, the world outside was king storms ruled, night ruled, predators ruled. But with fire in the cave, something new appeared. The centre. A glowing heartbeat around which people gathered. A place of warmth, not just heat. A place of return. Before fire, we wandered. After fire, we began to gather. The hearth became home. It didn't look like home. No walls, no bricks, no roofs. Just scorched rock, circles of blackened bone, shadows that flickered on stone. But it felt like home, because we chose to come back to it, because we remembered it, because fire remembered us. The taming of flame was not an act of dominance, it was a slow partnership. Fire was still dangerous, it still burned, it still consumed. But we'd learned its moods, its hungers, its rhythms. We became attuned. The way a mother learns the cry of her child, we learned the hiss of wet wood, the crackle of dry twigs, the colour of a dying ember, the sigh of fire falling asleep. We became fire's companion, and in return it became our guardian. Now, the night no longer ruled, the cold no longer bit, the animals no longer came too close. Fire pushed the darkness back, but more than that, it invited us inward. We sat closer. We painted, we remembered, we passed down stories. Because fire wasn't just warmth, it was memory, flickering and fading, then flaring up again. Just like us. When a tribe moved, fire came too, and so fire became portable time. A link between where we were and where we were going. It connected generations, one fire, one people. It was continuity glowing in the wind. Some fires never died, kept alive for months, years, decades, passed from mother to daughter, from cave to cave like a flame carried through eternity. Even the way we slept changed. Before fire, restless in shifts, eyes always open. After fire, curled in circles, heads on stones, peace in our lungs. The fire stayed awake for us, its light blinking gently, a signal to the world that we were not alone. Children stared into the flames and imagined gods. Elders stared into the flames and remembered them. Around the fire, we learned how to be human. Still, we could not yet create it. That gift was still out of reach. But the desire to possess fire, to call it forth from stone and stick, was growing. Because fire was no longer a visitor, it was family. We cleaned its ashes, we shaped its stones, we fed it like an animal, we named it in our hearts. Every tribe had a word for it. Even before language, there was sound, a grunt, a hum, a sacred syllable. And every sound meant the same thing: life. It is easy to forget how much of human history is built not on what we created, but on what we kept alive. The flame did not come from us. It came from the sky, the earth, the bones of the planet. But once it was born, we made sure it did not die. That was our first gift, our first duty, our first act of culture. Not war, not tools, not art, but the care of something fragile and sacred. And when fire came inside, we came with it. We sat around it. We told stories in its presence. We forged family in its heat. We began to believe in things beyond survival. We began to believe in home. So many revolutions would follow. The bow, the plough, the wheel, the word. But none of them would have been possible without that first partnership between trembling human hands and the fire they dared to carry. From borrowed flame to beloved flame, from wind-tossed embers to constant companion, from wandering beast to the soul of the cave. This was not just the taming of fire. This was the birth of belonging, the night hunter. There was a time when night was not just darkness. It was a presence. It pressed against the skin. It breathed on the back of the neck. It watched. Before fire, night had rules, simple ones. Do not wander. Do not speak. Do not challenge the unseen, because the unseen is always hungry. The sky would turn black, and the air would go still. The forest became silent, but not empty. Nothing moved, but everything was listening. A crack of a twig meant something was near. A growl in the dark meant you were already being chosen. There were no stars to pray to, only eyes in the bush, teeth in the shadows. And so we huddled, together, silent, small. Night wasn't a time, it was a predator. But then came fire, and with it came light. Not the pale shimmer of moonlight, but something alive. It flickered. It hissed. It pushed back the dark like a sword made of heat. And the night retreated. Not completely, but enough. Enough to see. Enough to breathe. Predators don't fear much, but they fear fire. It confuses them. Its light breaks the rhythm of the hunt. Its scent masks the prey. Its sound speaks of danger. And so they kept their distance. The lion, once bold, circled wider. The hyena, always daring, waited longer. The saber-toothed cat, silent and spectral, blinked and vanished into the trees. Because something new had appeared on the landscape, not just a flame, but a creature that controlled it. And in that sacred ring of orange light, we changed. We stopped hiding. We started watching, not for danger, but for each other. The tribe sat closer. The night stretched longer, and slowly thought began to rise like smoke. Because fire did not just change what we feared, it changed what we could imagine. Around the fire, the first conversations began. Not grunts, not warnings, but meaning we pointed at stars. We named them. We told stories of the beast we saw or the one we dreamed. We whispered about the man who wandered too far from the flame and never returned. We remembered the one who died and spoke his name again so the night wouldn't forget him. We invented myth. Before fire, we could not afford to wonder. Wondering got you killed. But fire gave us time. Time to stare. Time to listen. Time to remember. And in that remembering, something ancient was born. We looked into the flames and saw gods. Maybe they were spirits. Maybe they were ancestors. Maybe they were shapes and shadows that moved too perfectly to be accidents. But whatever they were, they lived in the fire. Because the flame danced. It breathed. It mimicked life. And if it was alive, it could hear. So we began to speak to it, not as a tool, not as a thing, but as something with a will. We offered meat. We whispered secrets. We told the fire what we feared and waited to see if it flared or fell. And when it stayed, we believed we were heard. The fire didn't just protect us. It became the first altar, the first pulpit, the first storyteller, the first mirror. Because when you stare into a fire long enough, you start to see things not just in the flame but in yourself. Nights grew longer but not in time, in depth. Before, a night was a waiting place. Now it was a canvas, a theatre, a temple. We imagined voices in the woods, shapes in the smoke. We gave names to the wind, to the cold, to the stars. We painted on cave walls, but the first stories weren't drawn, they were spoken in the hush between firelight and sleep. What did we say? No one knows. But if you listen closely to a fire, even today, you'll hear echoes. The story of the moon who fell in love with a hunter, the tale of the wolf who gave humans their breath, the warning of the spirit who waits just beyond the light. They weren't just entertainment, they were instructions on how to be human, on what to fear, on who to remember. The first stories weren't myths, they were survival maps, wrapped in wonder around the fire, the human mind stretched, not just to survive, but to make meaning. We were still weak, still slow, still prey. But we had a weapon no beast could match, imagination, and it sharpened in the dark, in the flicker, in the whisper, in the breath before sleep when a child asked, "Why do the stars move?" And the elder answered, "So the dead can find their way home." Fear became a language, then a story, then a belief. The jaguar was no longer just a killer, it became the guardian of the underworld. The wind was not just air, it was the breath of the mountain god. The fire was not just heat, it was the eye of something ancient watching us become ourselves. And as the fire burned, so did culture. Every night became a ritual, every ember a spark of identity. Here we learned rhythm, here we learned memory, here we passed down what could not be hunted, cooked or carved, but only spoken. And what is myth, but the first memory wrapped in mystery? We did not need to know the stars to follow them. We needed to believe in them, and belief was born in the firelight. Not from books, not from scrolls, but from the night, from the silence broken by story, from the moment the dark stopped being an enemy and became a place where meaning could live. We became night hunters, not of flesh, but of truths. We hunted symbols, we hunted stories, we hunted the shape of the world before dawn, and we did it all from the safety of a circle of people, a circle of flame, a circle of meaning. Even today, when the lights go out and the fire flickers, something ancient stirs in us. We lean closer, we listen, we remember. Because once, long ago, our ancestors looked into the dark and instead of hiding, they told a story. And so, the night, the cooked brain. It's easy to forget. We were once animals that chewed for hours, for lifetimes, for survival. Long jaws, heavy teeth, stomachs like factories. We were engines built to grind roots and crush raw flesh. We were ruled by hunger and by the time it took to silence it. Because raw food is resistance, it does not yield. It demands effort, energy, patience. And in those ancient days, most of the day was spent not hunting but chewing. Then fire arrived. Not just a tool, not just a flame, but a catalyst. It touched flesh and changed it. It kissed roots and softened them. It wrapped leaves in heat and broke their stubborn fibres. What once took hours to eat could now be swallowed in minutes. What once rotted the teeth now slipped down warm and ready. It wasn't just meat that fire transformed. It was time. It was energy. It was life. Anthropologist Richard Wrangham would say this much later, with charts and labs and peer-reviewed journals. Cooking made us human. But our ancestors knew it already. They felt it deep in the gut, long before they understood what a gut even was. Because after fire, something began to shift, subtly, silently, permanently. The mouth shrank, the jaw narrowed, the teeth grew smaller, the stomach didn't need to be a battlefield anymore. And the brain, the quiet, hungry passenger behind the eyes, began to grow. It was never just about nutrition. It was about efficiency. Raw food burned more energy than it gave. Cooked food gave back. It fed more than the belly. It fed the future. With every soft bite, with every easy swallow, we began to free up fuel not for the body but for thought. And thought? It's expensive. The human brain is a greedy organ. It's only 2% of the body, but it takes 20% of the body's energy. More than muscles, more than bones, more than anything else we carry. And without cooked food, without fire, there would have never been enough energy to fuel it. We'd still be chewing, still gnawing, still trapped in the raw world. But the flame changed that. It let us think. Fire didn't just warm our hands. It rewired our biology. It rebalanced the equation of life. Smaller guts, bigger skulls. The body downsized its machinery and gave the surplus to the mind, and the mind for the first time had room to dream. Think of it this way. Fire is not a thing we made. It is a thing that made us. It sculpted us from the inside, melted down our ancient digestion, cast a new mould for thought. Without fire, our ancestors could have survived, but they never would have reflected. They never would have wondered about the stars. They never would have painted the cave. They never would have whispered stories to the flame. Because the kind of mind that does those things can only exist in a body freed from the constant burden of chewing and digesting. Cooking gave us time, and time gave us meaning. Now, a mother could feed her child something soft, warm, rich. Now, an elder could eat with no teeth. Now, a hunter could feast and rest, not rip and tear. And with all that time saved, the fire was not just for food. It became a stage of school, a cradle of culture. We gathered, we spoke, we learned. Before fire, we consumed to survive. After fire, we consumed to understand. Because now, eating wasn't just fuel, it was ritual, a shared act, a sacred moment. And inside those moments, we learned how to pass on more than food. We passed on ideas. Richard Wrangham called it the cooking hypothesis. Others called it the spark of civilization. But you don't need a degree to feel the truth of it. Sit by a fire, watch meat crackle, smell the smoke in your hair, feel the way the heat draws people close. Even now, it awakens something buried, something ancient. Because it's not just about calories, it's about connection. Cooked food doesn't just feed better, it brings us together. Even predators hunt alone. But humans? We cook in groups. We share. We divide. We season. We wait. We feed the youngest. We honour the oldest. And when the meal is done, we talk. We tell stories. We ask questions. We become more than bodies. And in this togetherness, language sharpens, memory stretches, emotion swells. It's no coincidence that the rise of cooking parallels the rise of the human voice. We weren't just eating more, we were saying more, and saying it better. Every time a fire was built, a brain was fed, not just with fats and proteins, but with permission to rest, to reflect, to evolve. Fire gave us the nutrients, yes, but it also gave us the space, the quiet, the safety, the seconds between danger and sleep where thoughts grow like seeds in warm soil. So much of who we are depends not on how we fought, but how we fed, and fire was the mother of both. It hunted nothing. It killed nothing. It gave and gave again, transforming roots into meals, bones into broth, time into something we could share. Without cooked food, we would have stayed in the wild. But with it, we became something else. Not just Homo sapiens, but Homo ignis, the fire people, the species that fed its mind with flame. Even now, in our modern kitchens, fire is still with us, hidden in wires and coils in microwaves, but it's there cooking, softening, transforming. And inside us, the memory of those first warm bites lingers. The warmth that didn't just fill the belly, but lit up the brain. So next time you eat, remember, that bite of bread, that spoonful of soup, that roasted root is more than food. It is a legacy, a million-year-old pact between the human species and a spark that chose to stay. Of memory. The night was still. The wind whispered through the cave's mouth, and deep inside a flicker. Not sunlight, not moonlight, but something made. Something kept. A small fire, crackling inside a stone chamber. Its light didn't just warm the body, it lit the walls and what was on them. Not blank rock, not random scratches, but lines, forms, shapes that moved. The first stories were not written, they were drawn in fire. Somewhere, tens of thousands of years ago, a human dipped fingers in ash and ochre. Kneeling beside the flame, they began to mark the stone, not for survival, not for food, but for something else. Something impossible to chew, hunt, or wear. They painted a horse, a lion, a hand, a spirit. And in that act, memory was born. Why? Why paint? Why bother? We had no alphabets, no parchment, no reason. Only need. Because something inside us had begun to overflow. Images, emotions, questions too big for silence. And so we did what no other creature could. We left proof of our imagination. In caves like Chauvet and Lascaux, the walls speak in whispers of charcoal. Bison charging through stone. Deer leaping mid-air, hands pressed like ancient signatures, not to own but to say, I was here. These weren't decorations, they were offerings, declarations, echoes, and they were made beside fire, always fire, because fire did more than cook. It revealed, its flicker gave the walls life. The animals didn't sit still, they moved flickering with the flame, twisting and leaping in the dance of light and shadow. A painted lion became a predator in motion. A row of dots became a stampede. The wall wasn't a canvas, it was a theatre, and the flame was the first projector. We didn't just watch, we believed. The child sitting near the fire saw the antelope leap. The elder beside them whispered its story, how it ran faster than the wind, how it once spoke to the moon, how its hooves struck stars from the sky. And the child did not ask, is it true? Because it was true in spirit, true in story. True in the mind, fire became the storyteller's throne, a stage where no actor stood yet everything danced, and we gathered, night after night, year after year, to see what could not be seen, to hear what had been lost, to remember what had never happened but should have. Because what is a story, if not a bridge between memory and dream? And what is imagination, if not the fire behind the eyes? Some call it art, some call it myth. But it was more than that. It was our mirror. These drawings were not just about animals, they were about us, the hunters, the wanderers, the children of the dark who now dared to mark stone with the shape of thoughts. Imagine the moment. A girl stands at the back of the cave. Her mother's hands are covered in red pigment. The fire crackles, the shadows rise. She watches as her mother presses a hand to the wall, then outlines it in ash. The hand is lifted. The shape remains. And the girl sees her lineage, sees her legacy, sees something immortal. We had no kings, no calendars, no cities. But we had names, and we began to speak them, to pass them on. The man who trapped the lion, the woman who called rain, the child who never returned. They became stories, and stories became memory with breath. In the flickering light of fire, the past became visible not as bones, not as scars, but as stories we told again and again until they became truth. The dead were not forgotten. They were remembered into legend. Fire taught us many things: how to cook, how to survive, how to see in the dark. But this was something greater. Fire showed us how to witness, to take what we felt inside and place it outside where others could see it, feel it, add to it. The first imagination wasn't a private thing. It was shared, drawn on walls, spoken aloud, passed from one mind to another like embers from hand to hand. Even the walls began to change. We didn't just draw what we saw. We drew what we feared, what we hoped, what we believed. We made gods out of horns. We made heroes out of hunters. We gave shape to forces beyond the sky and called them spirits. And so myth was born. Not to lie, but to explain. Why does the sun rise? Because the lion god roars each dawn. Why do the rains come? Because our ancestors dance in the clouds. Why do we die? Because the fire in the chest fades and returns to the stars. Every line on that cave wall was a question made visible. Every handprint was a vow. We were here. We wondered. We remembered. Memory had always lived in the body, but now it lived in places, in walls, in pigments, in flame. We became a species of external souls casting ourselves outward so that the future would never forget the fire. No other creature does this. No wolf howls history. No ape draws gods. No bird sings myth. Only us. Because only we were shaped by flame and story at the same time. This was the real evolution, not the shrinking gut, not the growing brain, but the first spark of meaning, the first time a human looked at a shadow and saw a memory. And even now, in museums, in books, in films, in temples, we are still those people, still sitting beside the fire, still whispering the names of beasts and stars, still pressing our hands to the walls of time. Because deep inside we still remember what the fire showed us. That imagination is the only real immortality we've ever known, the weapon of survival. We had no claws, no fangs, no armour, just fear behind the eyes and fire in the hand, and that was enough. The world did not ask for humans, it was doing just fine without us. The lion had its pride, the bear had its bulk, the eagle had its sky. And we had our skin, thin, hairless, too weak to fight, too slow to run, too fragile to last. But we had something no other creature held, the torch. We were not born hunters, we were not even scavengers by design. We were frightened bipeds, watching from the tree line as stronger beasts tore meat from bone. But then we found fire, and we didn't just survive, we began to shape the hunt. It started small. A fallen ember from lightning-struck trees, a smouldering branch carried carefully in bark, a ring of rocks to hold the flame in place. We couldn't make fire yet, but we could borrow it, keep it, feed it. And once fire belonged to us, we turned it into our weapon. You don't need teeth when you can scare. You don't need speed when you can trap. You don't need strength when you can burn. And burn we did. Fire for the hunt. On cliffs where mammoths roamed, our ancestors lit small blazes. Nothing dramatic, just smoke, heat, confusion. The great beast began to shift. Woolly giants, too big to stop, edged toward the cliffside as flames narrowed their path. And then they fell. Not because of strength, not because of skill, but because of fire, guided not by instinct but by intention. That was the difference. Every predator hunts. Only humans plan. We drove bison into traps. We smoked rabbits from their holes. We wielded fire not to chase but to corner. A spark became a snare. A blaze became a strategy. A ring of fire became a weaponized border no animal could cross. And the results? Meat for weeks, bones for tools, skins for warmth. All won not through violence but through fire's quiet creeping terror. Fire for protection. But fire didn't only help us hunt, it helped us survive the night. Before flame, the dark was not just dark, it was alive, with things that crept, that watched, that waited for the slow, the sick, the young. But fire held them back. Its crackle was a warning, its glow a barrier, its smoke a curse to sharp noses. Lions stopped approaching, hyenas kept their distance, wolves lingered then vanished. We didn't build fences, we built fire circles, a ring of light against a world that wanted us gone. And for the first time we slept, not in fear, but in shifts under flame. We used smoke to blind wasps, to rob honey from guarded nests. We used ash to mask our scent, to become invisible to the nose. We learned to coat ourselves in the remnants of flame and walk among beasts as something new, not prey, not predator, but firewalkers. Fire as a tool. The spear came before the gun, but fire sharpened the spear. Our ancestors thrust wood into flame, then pulled it out glowing. The tip blackened, hardened, no longer brittle, no longer weak. A fire-hardened spear could pierce hide, could bring down deer, could hold off a charging boar. And all it took was fire and time, not strength, not claws, just patience and heat. Water that once sickened us could now be boiled clean. Meat that once spoiled could now be smoked, dried, saved. Fire let us carry food farther, cross deserts, climb mountains. Because we no longer needed the feast to be now we could preserve it. We outlasted hunger not through abundance but through flame. We became the first species that changed the rules of the wild, no longer limited by what we could kill in a day, no longer bound to rivers for clean water, no longer fearful of every nighttime whisper. Fire didn't just give us safety, it gave us range. And range gave us dominion. The weak became terrifying. It's easy to forget how helpless we once were. Strip away the tools, forget the language, erase the clothes, the homes, the gods. What's left? A two-legged ape with soft skin, flat teeth and forward eyes. But then give that ape a torch and everything changes, Nari. Predators flee. Forests burn. Mountains echo with the cry of fire-hardened weapons. We were still small, still weak, but now we could terrify. Other animals fled when threatened. We stood our ground and lit the sky on fire. We carried flame across continents, lit grasslands to drive herds, burned back forests to make paths. To the world, we became a force of transformation, a species with fire in its bones. And the miracle? We never even meant to. There was no blueprint, no grand design, just the slow, patient taming of flame until it obeyed our will. We asked for warmth, fire gave us weapons. We asked for food, fire gave us power. For the first time we had an edge. Before fire we lived at the mercy of the world. After fire we became its rival. We could survive cold not by fleeing but by burning. We could defeat predators not by fighting but by outwitting. And slowly, one ember at a time, we climbed the food chain. Not to the top, not yet, but we had a foothold. It wasn't just survival anymore, It was strategy. It was resistance. It was domination. And it all came from a tool that didn't bleed, bite, or roar, only flickered, only whispered, only burned. No other species had it. Not truly, not like us. Some birds use fire. Some animals fear it. But we made it our partner, our guardian, our sword and shield. So when the night comes and you strike a match, light a stove, gather round a campfire, remember what you're holding. You're touching the oldest weapon in human hands, the one that made predators back down, that turned the hunted into hunters, that carved the world into human paths. You were not built to survive this world, but your ancestors found fire, and with it, they rewrote the rules. They lit the night, they cooked the mind, and then they fought back. The forge of transformation. Fire didn't just protect us, it transformed us, and then it transformed everything else. For thousands of years, fire was our shield, a warmth against the wind, a light in the dark, a whisper that we too belonged in this brutal world. But at some point something shifted, something fundamental. We stopped using fire simply to survive and started using it to shape, to twist, to break, to rebuild. And in that moment, fire ceased to be a force of nature. It became a tool of transformation, a chisel, a crucible, a god that could sculpt the bones of the earth itself. Because fire could do what no stone or claw could, change the nature of things, turn soft clay into stone, melt metal from rock, transform invisible sand into shimmering glass. No other element could reshape reality like this. No other force could take what was and make it something that had never been. We didn't just master fire. We fed it dreams and watched those dreams harden into tools, clay into pottery. The first change was humble. It didn't roar. It didn't gleam. It didn't slice or pierce. It held water. Before fire, containers were skins, gourds, carved wood, fragile, impermanent. They rotted, leaked, shattered. But then someone, perhaps by accident, placed wet clay too close to the fire, and when they came back it was no longer mud. It was stone, shaped, solid, useful. A bowl that would not bend, a jar that could withstand time. We don't know who made the first pot. We don't know why. But across the world, from China's riverbanks to the caves of the Sahara, fired clay appeared. And it stayed. For 20,000 years it has stayed, surviving even when we didn't. The pot was more than a container. It was a revolution. Because now we could store things not just for days, but for seasons. Grain, water, salt, soups and roots and stories. The fire-hardened pot made survival portable. It turned settlement from a hope into a strategy. Fire turned mud into permanence, and the world became less temporary. Stone into metal. But pottery was just the beginning, a whisper compared to what came next. Because deep in the earth, beneath layers of soil and bone, there were veins of power locked in rock. Copper, tin, gold, iron, sleeping. And for most of human history, they stayed that way, buried, beautiful, useless, until fire became hotter, controlled, enclosed, focused. A hearth became a kiln became a furnace, and within those walls of flame the rocks began to bleed. The first time a human saw metal melt, it must have looked like magic. Stone dripping, shimmering like water, soft enough to pour, hard enough to cut. We called it smelting. But it wasn't science yet. It was alchemy, and it changed the world. Tools once chipped from stone were now cast from copper. Jewelry once carved now gleamed in gold. And then came bronze, an alloy of copper and tin stronger than either alone. The Bronze Age wasn't a time. It was a testament. that humans could take what Earth had buried and make it something deadlier, sharper, stronger, and fire didn't stop there. Eventually we found iron, more common, more stubborn, harder to melt, harder to work, but worth the battle. Because iron made ploughs and swords, nails and armour, it made empires. And fire was its only key. Every weapon, every crown, every hinge and chisel and chain owed its life to the inferno, sand into glass. But metal wasn't the only miracle, because somewhere, perhaps on a beach or in a lightning-blasted desert, humans noticed something new. When fire met sand, something shimmered. Not stone, not ash, but something clear, something fragile and sharp, yet somehow eternal. Glass. It wasn't useful at first, just beautiful. Tiny beads, jagged chunks, symbols of mystery and wealth. But eventually, as techniques grew, we learned to shape it. To blow, to stretch, to mould and form. And with that, we gained something no species ever had. Windows. The power to see through walls, to bottle light, to magnify, to understand. Fire gave us the eye of the microscope, the lens of the telescope, the shimmer of stained glass in temples, the vial that holds medicine, the mirror that reflects our own face. From lightning's fury to desert sand, fire made clarity. It made vision. Fire made nature new. Clay, metal, glass. They had always existed, but not like this. Not as armour, not as tools, not as memory. Fire didn't just reveal these materials, it transformed them, changed their nature, took what was passive and made it active. The earth had its elements, fire gave them purpose, and with each transformation we transformed too. The potter became priest, the smith became kingmaker, the glassblower a wizard of light. We began to reimagine the world not as something we walked through, but something we could build. The first cities rose, not where the soil was richest, but where the fire burned hottest. Forges, ovens, furnaces. Every empire had its flame, every dynasty its hearth. We think of pyramids and temples, but behind every wonder of stone was the fire that shaped the tools. This was the age where fire left the forest and entered the human heart, not just for warmth, not just for fear, but for creation. We were no longer just shaping weapons, we were shaping the future. And fire, the destroyer, the devourer, the untamed became our first collaborator. It melted the raw, it strengthened the weak, it made beauty out of ash. The forge wasn't just a place, it was a threshold. Step into it, and you emerged, changed. Stronger, sharper, made with purpose. Just like the metal it made. And so we hammered our way through history, with bellows and anvils, with tongs and coals, each spark a seed, each flame a promise, not of safety, but of possibility. We became fire's children. Before we feared fire, now we fed it. Before we borrowed its light, now we bent it to our will. We became not just survivors, but creators, not just dreamers, but makers. And it all began with that one flickering ember held in trembling hands somewhere deep in prehistory. Fire was never just fire. It was the forge of transformation, of the world, of the earth, of us, the village flame. Before the village came the flame. Before the temple, the pot, the plough, there was a circle of stones, a handful of embers, and people who decided to stay. We are taught that civilization began with buildings, with bricks, with tools, with walls. But the truth is simpler, more ancient, more tender. Civilization began when someone said, "Let's keep this fire burning." Not for a night, not for a hunt, but for good. This was the beginning of something new, not just survival, not just movement, but presence belonging home. We were once shadows that wandered, Homo sapiens the restless ones, following the herds, avoiding the cold, lighting fires that died with the dawn. But then came the village flame, a fire that didn't move, that didn't flicker out, that burned for days, for seasons, for generations. And around that flame we changed, from wandering tribes to settled people. The world before villages was wild and wide. Tribes roamed, hunters followed migrations, gatherers listened to the rhythms of root and rain. Fire was a borrowed companion, lit when needed, abandoned when done. But in some forgotten place, a river valley, a lake shore, a windswept plain, a fire stayed lit, and so did the people. They didn't move on. They circled stones around the flame. They brought wood, they cooked, they warmed, they slept and woke to the same light. And for the first time in human history, people said, "Here, this is where we stay." Settling wasn't a plan. It wasn't a strategy. It was an instinct born from fire. Because fire asked for care and it demanded fuel. It needed space. It craved attention. And so we built around it. Not temples, not palaces, hearths. The first human architecture wasn't upward, it was inward. A ring of fire, a ring of trust. The hearth became the heart, and the home was born. The hearth as centre. In every early dwelling, one thing was constant, not the walls, not the roof, but the fire. The hearth sat in the centre, alive like a breathing lung, crackling like a storyteller, glowing like a memory. Children learned to crawl toward it. Elders leaned close to whisper. Food was prepared beside it. Songs were born within it. The hearth was not just practical, it was sacred, because wherever fire lived, so did we. It gave warmth, but it also gave structure, one flame, many hands, one ember, 1,000 stories. The hearth taught us what it meant to gather, to come in from the cold, to wait for bread to rise, to listen, to be still, to share. There, beside the flames, humans did something radical. They became a community. Not a pack, not a family, but a village, bound not by blood, but by fire. Shared flames, shared stories, shared futures. You can tell when a people have settled because their stories begin to grow roots. Before, tales were short, urgent, carried on backs, whispered in the dark. But now, around the fire, we had time to speak, to remember, to imagine. The village flame wasn't just light, it was theatre. The shadows cast danced on cave walls, mimicking beasts, spirits, gods. Every flicker shaped a myth, every crackle sparked a name. We told stories not just to entertain, but to remember. What herbs healed, what paths led to danger, what stars meant rain, what ancestors had done. And more than that, we told stories to see the future, to ask what could be, to dream aloud, to wonder what happens after death, after winter, after flame. The fire didn't just roast meat, it cooked memory. It turned strangers into listeners, listeners into believers, and believers into culture. Fire gave rise to cooperation. You cannot keep a fire alive alone, not through the night, not through the rain, not through the turning of the seasons. It must be tended, watched, fed. And so humans began to cooperate. One gathered wood, one stirred the pot, one soothed the child, one guarded the perimeter. And so the division of labour was born, not from conquest, not from command, but from necessity, because fire needed us all and we in turn needed each other. No more lone survivors, no more isolated acts. Now we were a people, a we, a this is ours. Even conflict changed. Because in a world with fire, disagreements had consequences. A quarrel too loud could extinguish the flame. A fight too fierce could scatter the wood. A village without fire was a village without life. And so we learned to compromise, to resolve, to speak, to govern. Flame gave us more than heat. It gave us the first rules, the first pacts, the first rituals of peace. Fire birthed culture. Every culture began with fire. Every feast, every festival, every rite of passage. Births were marked with it. So were deaths. Ashes scattered, torches passed, lanterns lit in mourning or joy. Fire became a language when words were not enough. It was the signal on the hilltop, the light in the window, the heartbeat of the season. It became ceremony in harvest, in prayer, in love. And from that ceremony came identity. We were no longer just the people of the hunt, or the river, or the mountain. We were now the people of this fire, this hearth, this flame. We gave it names, offered it gifts, made it immortal in stories. We kept it alive, and it kept us human. And when the fire died, we mourned, not for the logs, but for the silence, the dark, the loss of centre. We knew even then that fire was more than light. It was belonging. Fire became the first anchor. You can wander far from home, cross rivers, climb hills, sleep beneath alien stars. But if you light a fire and sit close, you're home. That's what fire gave us. A sense that somewhere we are meant to stay, that we don't have to run anymore. That warmth can outlast the night. It taught us that community isn't just survival. It's presence. It's witness. It's the echo of your name in another's mouth when the wind howls loud. And so the village was born. Not from bricks, not from conquest, but from the simple act of sitting down beside a fire and deciding not to leave. We didn't build around leaders, we built around flames, and in that glow we discovered something stronger than any spear, each other, the fire in the sky. Before we had gods, we had fire. And long before we understood the stars, we looked up at them and saw what we had already known. Flame. Fire began as something beneath our hands, a crackle, a warmth, a spark of survival. But eventually, as our minds stretched past the forest, past the village, past the edge of what could be touched, we saw something greater. A fire that wasn't kindling, that didn't need wood or wind. A fire that rose and fell in the sky, that seared the skin by day and blinked in frozen silence by night. We called it the sun, we called it lightning, we called it life. But mostly we called it sacred, because fire was the first thing that felt alive without breathing. It moved, it devoured, it gave birth to light and left behind ashes. The flicker in the dark. You don't have to go far. Just turn back time, not by centuries, not by kingdoms, not even by bones turned to dust. Go further, back before pyramids, before stone tools, before names, back to a world that had no fire. The sky was the same, the stars still burned, but the ground was cold, the earth was a sleeping beast, and we were just its shivering dream. There were no hearths, no smoke, no glow behind bark huts, no ember to follow in the night, only darkness. It wasn't the kind of darkness we know now, the flick of a light switch, the dim hum of a screen. This was darkness alive, thick, breathing, ancient. It moved like a predator, it swallowed sound, it pressed against the skin like wet fur, and inside it, early humans, Homo erectus, Homo habilis, the first quiet tribes sat still. Not predators, not hunters, just witnesses. They curled in caves, their backs to the stone, eyes wide, ears straining. The night was not safe. It was not gentle. It was filled with things they could not see. Eyes that glowed and teeth that glinted, wolves that crept close, cats that didn't roar, serpents that hissed from the brush. We were not kings, we were not gods, we were prey. And still we watched, and still we listened. Because even then, even in the fear, something inside us refused to turn away. A flicker, a hunger, not for food, not for safety, for understanding. There are no words left from that age, no poems carved into stone, but they left other clues. Charcoal smudges, scrapes on walls, teeth worn down not from eating but from whispering. Because in the dark, even before language, they told stories, in grunts, in gestures, in dreams, of what lay beyond the fireless sky, of spirits in the trees, of beasts too big to fight but too beautiful to forget. And then, one day the sky tore open, not metaphor, lightning. A jagged scream across the heavens, and where it touched earth, something new was born. Fire. Not a spark, not a candle, a roaring, cracking, growling creature of light. It leapt from tree to tree. It consumed. It danced. It screamed. And we ran. The first time we saw fire, we didn't celebrate. We fled, because fire was alive and it did not love us. But someone stayed. Somewhere in that ancient tribe a figure stood still. We'll never know their name, their face, only that they didn't turn away. They watched the flames, not with terror, but something deeper. Not curiosity, not awe, something older, recognition. Because fire was not foreign, it was not strange, it was what we had always feared and always needed. Fire wasn't just warmth, it was witness, it was mirror, it was soul. For years, gods were real. Fire gave birth to gods. Across every ancient culture there was one constant, a god of fire. It didn't matter the continent, the language, the colour of the earth. Wherever fire burned, reverence followed. In the Vedic hymns of ancient India there was Agni, the two-faced fire god, born of the logs and smoke, mouth of the gods, messenger between earth and heaven. He consumed offerings, carried them upward, turned the flesh of sacrifice into divine connection. Without Agni, there was no ritual, no bridge between mortal and immortal. He was not a metaphor. He was fire itself, alive, hungry, holy. In Greece, fire had many names, but one god shaped it, Hephaestus, the lame god of the forge, banished from Olympus, but master of all that burned and bent. He made weapons for gods, armour for heroes. He controlled the crucible where chaos became order. His flames didn't flicker, they hammered. They transformed ore into blade, stone into fortress, imagination into invention. And beyond them Zoroastrianism, where sacred fires burned eternally. Shinto shrines where fire cleansed and purified. Norse mythology where Surtur the fire giant would one day end the world in flame. In every culture, fire wasn't just an element. It was a divine agent, the force that could destroy and yet give life. It was our first paradox, and so it became our first god. Fire as life, destruction, rebirth. Why did fire become divine? Because it mirrored us. It was alive but not a beast. It grew but had no limbs. It died but could return from a single spark. And just like us, it could create or destroy. A hearth gave warmth. A wildfire erased forests. A torch could guide you. A blaze could blind you. Fire cooked the harvest, but it also burned the field. No wonder early humans looked at it with both awe and fear. Fire was never just useful. It was never just dangerous. It was everything at once. And so, fire became more than light. It became a symbol of life dancing, flickering, vital, of destruction consuming, roaring, unstoppable, and of rebirth the way a field once scorched grew greener than ever before. Just like life, just like us, we began to see ourselves in the flame, our anger, our passion, our mortality. And we began to build not just fires but temples, sacred flames that never died. Some fires were never allowed to go out. not because they were needed for warmth, but because they meant something more. They were sacred flames carried across generations, guarded day and night, fed by ritual, not necessity. In ancient Persia, Zoroastrian priests tended flames that burned for centuries. These were not symbols, they were the presence of Ahura Mazda, the divine order, in the chaos of the world. To let a flame die was to invite disorder, to forget one's place in the cosmic balance. In Rome, the Vestal Virgins guarded the eternal flame in the Temple of Vesta. They were chosen as children, sworn to chastity, and punished with death if the fire ever went out. Because that flame was Rome, its heat warmed the empire, its light defended its soul. Even in the Americas, the Aztecs held the new fire ceremony every 52 years, a moment when the calendar reset and the entire world risked being destroyed. Fires across the empire were extinguished. The world waited in darkness. Then, from a sacred point on a mountaintop, priests kindled a new flame, and all of civilization was reborn. These were not just acts of religion. They were acts of remembrance. They said, "We are not alone. We are not in control, but we are connected. To the fire, to the cosmos, to something beyond understanding." What we could not understand, we worshipped. We knew how to light a fire. We learned to carry it, to tame it, to shape it. But we never stopped fearing it, and we never stopped wondering. What is flame? Where does it go when it dies? Why does it dance like it has a soul? Even today, science can explain flame, temperature, oxygen, combustion. But those answers are dry, clinical, empty of wonder. Because fire still feels alive. Still feels like it remembers us even when we've forgotten it. Still feels like it knows something we don't. The ancients worshipped what they could not name, and so they named fire as divine. We may not bow to Hephaestus, or offer butter to Agni, or guard the temple flame with our lives, but we still light candles when we pray, when we grieve, when we remember. Fire has never stopped being sacred. It is still present at every turning point. Birth, marriage, death, festivals, wars, peace treaties. We light torches in protest. We strike matches in vigil. We gather around fireworks to greet the new year. We are modern, digital, electric. But fire still lives in our symbols, in our rituals, in our quiet midnight awe when a single flame flickers in the dark. It reminds us of where we came from and where we cannot return. Because the fire was never just in the hearth. It was never just in the trees. It was always in us. And when we looked up at the stars, we saw it again burning in silence, carving through the dark, distant, eternal, unreachable. The fire in the sky. The Promethean curse. We did not invent fire. We borrowed it. Stole it, some might say. Wrested it from the gods, snatched it from the sky like a thief in the night. And ever since we've been living with the consequences. There is an ancient story, older than parchment, older than empire. A whisper passed through generations, etched into stone and memory. A titan named Prometheus climbed the heavens, took fire from Olympus and gave it to humans. Not a spark, not a flame, but power. The gods were furious. Fire was theirs. To touch it was to trespass. So they punished Prometheus not with death, but with eternity. They chained him to a rock, and every day an eagle came to feast on his liver. Every night it grew back. This was not revenge, this was a warning. Fire is not a toy, it is not a tool, it is a curse disguised as a gift. And yet we lit it anyway. Fire gave us power and danger. With fire we became more than animals. We were warm and danger. With fire we became more than animals. We were warm when others froze. We were fed when others starved. We forged spears, baked clay, melted ore. We built kingdoms, we wrote laws, We shaped the world, but fire was never tamed, only momentarily obeyed, because what bends can also break, what serves can also consume. Every campfire held the seed of a blaze, every forge a future battlefield, every torch a spark that could touch the wind and turn forests to ash. We called it progress, but somewhere deep inside we remembered Prometheus. We remembered the price. Because the more power we claimed, the more fragile the world became. Prometheus punished for the gift. Why did the gods punish him? Because he crossed a line, not of theft, but of balance. He gave humans something too early, before they were ready, before they understood the cost. Fire wasn't just warmth, it was will. It let us shape the world instead of being shaped by it. We became creators, we became masters, but we never stopped being fragile. Prometheus was punished, yes, but his curse didn't end with him. It passed into us, into every forest we clear-cut, into every war ignited, into every factory chimney that chokes the sky. Because the curse wasn't in the fire, it was in what we did with it. Myth as warning of hubris. The myth of Prometheus is not about gods and eagles. It is about us, our ambition, our hunger, our refusal to stop at enough. It is a myth of hubris, the belief that we can control what should only be respected. We took fire, and with it, we took responsibility. But somewhere along the way, we forgot the second part. We learned to split atoms and built bombs. We discovered oil and set the oceans on fire. We found ways to harness electricity and lost sight of the flame's original warning. The story of Prometheus is etched not just in myth, but in history. Every civilization that rose too fast, burned too hot, and crumbled under its own glow. Babylon, Rome, Easter Island, empires that worshipped flame and became ash. We keep telling ourselves we're smarter than before, wiser, safer. But fire doesn't care about confidence. It only cares about balance. And when that balance tips, it does not apologize. It burns. Fire is creation and destruction through. This is the paradox. Fire gives life, and fire takes it away. It cooks our food, but also spoils our air. It illuminates our cities, but blinds the stars. It forges steel for bridges, but also for swords. There is no good fire, no evil fire, only the fire we choose to use or abuse. And in that choice lies our fate. Every torch held at a wedding is cousin to the torch lit in war. Every sacred flame can one day spill from its bowl and become wildfire. Every candle beside a cradle remembers the fire beside a grave. We cannot separate these things. Because the same force that protects the village can also destroy the forest that surrounds it. The same power that lit our myths has also scorched our futures. Fire is not loyal. It answers to no one. It only exists to transform. And in transformation, there is always a loss. The balance is fragile. We walk a tightrope every time we strike a match. Every time we turn on a stove, launch a rocket, light a cigarette, start an engine. We are Prometheus with a lighter, with a gas line, with an entire burning world beneath our feet. And the rope beneath us? It is fraying. The planet warms, the forests retreat. The glaciers groan. We did not set out to burn the earth, but that's the thing about fire, it doesn't need intention, only fuel. And we've given it plenty. We forgot that fire was never truly ours, it was only ever borrowed. And every borrowed gift comes due. So, what now? Do we smother the flame? Abandon it? Return to darkness? No. Because the curse of Prometheus is not that he gave us fire, it's that we forgot why it was sacred. The balance can be found again, but it will not come through dominance, it will come through remembrance, through humility, through reverence, through a return to the hearth not as owners, but as guardians, because fire never belonged to us. It simply passed through our hands, and now we must choose. Do we pass it on carefully, or let it consume everything we've built? The eagle still circles, the rock still waits, the myth is not over, and the flame still burns, the fire that changed everything. Once fire was something we knelt beside. It lived in bowls of stone, in pits dug beneath stars, in the trembling hands of wanderers who carried its embers like sacred seeds. It was a flicker in the dark, a whisper of warmth, a god to be fed, feared and honoured. But then we unleashed it, and fire, no longer a companion, became a force that roared from inside metal beasts, pushed pistons, belched smoke and pulled entire civilizations behind it. This was not the fire of myth. This was the fire of industry, the Industrial Revolution, fire unchained. It began quietly, with coal pulled from the belly of the earth, with boilers and bellows, furnaces and flues, with soot-blackened hands and gears that never slept. The Industrial Revolution wasn't a single spark. It was a wildfire. One factory, then 100. One railway, then 1,000. One city, then a continent wrapped in smoke and steel. Before, fire had limits. It required attention, care, patience. It flickered with the wind, could vanish with the rain. But now, fire was bound inside machines, no longer flickering, now relentless. It boiled water. It moved iron. It lit cities not with flame but with current. Coal-fed boilers turned into locomotives. Locomotives turned into empires. Empires turned into smoke. We called it progress. We called it power. But we had built something else too. A world on fire. Coal, steam, combustion. The fire inside machines. The age of the hearth ended. The age of engines began. We fed coal into furnaces like priests offering sacrifice, but not to gods. To factories, to trains, to ships and mills and guns. And in return, we got speed. We got steel. We got production without pause. Steam engines became the lungs of the 19th century. The fire inside them never rested. It hissed, it hammered, it reshaped the human clock. Days became shifts. Nights became illuminated. The stars disappeared beneath smog, but profits burned brighter than the moon. Then came combustion. A flame compressed into a cylinder, exploding, driving forward, not just engines but everything. The car, the plane, the tank, the city. Fire no longer just burned wood or coal, it burned time, and the world began to spin faster than anyone could understand. Cities rose, empires grew. The fire inside machines built the modern world. It forged skyscrapers, laid railway veins across continents, spun turbines that powered entire nations. It birthed megacities, vast machines of glass and brick and breath, fed by wires, fueled by oil, surrounded by smokestacks and sirens. Empires that once relied on swords now ruled with steamships and steel tracks. The British Empire stretched across the globe, powered by coal from Wales, ships from Liverpool, and factories from Manchester. The sun never set because the fire never stopped burning. With each passing year, the fire demanded more. More forests, more coal, more bodies, more time. And we gave it all because the glow felt like destiny. But even then, in the furnace light of factories, there were shadows. But so did pollution, bombs, and war. The fire we unchained didn't come without consequence. It blackened skies, it poisoned rivers, it sickened lungs. It turned cities into choking chambers where coal dust coated every window and children coughed soot before they could speak. We called it the price of progress, but it was a slow-burning cost, one we barely noticed until the forests were gone and the ice began to crack. And then there were the bombs. Because once fire could power machines, we wondered, could it be used to end, to conquer, to terrify? Gunpowder had already taught us one lesson. But chemistry, once wedded to fire, became something far worse. We learned to weaponize flame, napalm incendiary bombs, flamethrowers, firebombing raids that erased entire cities overnight. And finally, the atom split. Not with firewood or coal, but with something more ancient, the sun reborn inside a bomb. Hiroshima, Nagasaki. Cities vaporized in seconds. Not by accident, by design. A fire that could not be tamed, only feared. This was Prometheus again, not chained but clapping as the eagle came for us instead. We had not just borrowed fire, we had rewritten it into something divine and demonic, healing and horrifying. A light that no longer warmed but warned. We burned too brightly, too fast. The Industrial Revolution was not a revolution. It was a conflagration, a great burning that devoured centuries of tradition in a matter of decades. We thought ourselves gods, masters of flame, masters of earth. But what burns fast burns out. And now we see the cost. The glaciers melt, the oceans rise, the smoke we lit in 1850 still hangs in the air. And the machines, they still burn, still demand, still whisper more. We lit the match, we fanned the flames, we built entire civilizations on the back of a dragon we thought we had tamed. But it was never tamed, only fed, and it is hungry still. Now, we find ourselves standing at the edge of the firelight, just like our ancestors once did, only now. The fire is behind us, not before. And what lies ahead? Not darkness, not night, but something worse. Smoke. We can't go back. We cannot return to the flicker in the cave, the ember in the bark, the myth of sacred flame. But we can remember, and that matters. Because the fire that changed everything is still changing us. And the question is no longer, what can fire do? It is, what will we choose to do with it? The spark within us. Today, fire is silent. It hums inside walls, it pulses through wires, it glows on screens hidden behind glass and code and distance. It no longer crackles in the forest or roars in the heart of the cave. We have tamed its voice, shrunk its flame, boxed it in. And yet we carry it still. You can see it in the flicker of a match, in the pilot light of a stove, in the whirring core of an engine, in the silent furnace of a nuclear reactor. Yes, today fire is not flame, it is electricity, it is data. It is the beating heart of machines and the quiet breath of satellites. But the real fire? It still lives inside us. Today we carry fire in wires, engines, reactors. The torch didn't go out, it evolved. Today's campfires are servers, our bonfires are rockets, our hearths are lithium-powered rectangles we cradle like talismans. Every engine spark, every fusion core, every drone flight and solar flare, they are all echoes of that first ember carried in bark across frozen plains. We drive on fire, we build with it, we fly with it, we die by it, but we no longer see it. Fire has become invisible. It no longer inspires awe, it no longer demands reverence. It is just a button, a circuit, a source. But here's the secret. Just because fire has changed shape doesn't mean it has changed meaning. Because even if we've turned it into current, even if it flows through silicon and satellite, the ancient fire still burns in us. Ancient fire still burns in us. It burns in the child who stares into a candle long after the others have stopped watching. It burns in the scientist who chases lightning in a bottle. It burns in the rebel who throws sparks into broken systems and dares them to catch fire. We don't always recognize it, but it's there. The same fire that made us gather, made us cook, made us fight and tell and dream. The same fire that lit the first myth and the last rocket. We are not machines, not wires, not code. We are embers carried forward by time. We forget this, but our bones remember. Our blood runs warm not just because of biology, but because of memory. The dreamer who stared into flames. Once, long ago, someone knelt beside a fire and stared into the flame, not with hunger but with wonder. This was the first dreamer. They did not speak. They watched. They let the fire speak to them. They saw the spirit of the hunt, the echo of ancestors, the promise of something more. And for the first time, the mind looked inward and caught fire. That was the moment when flame became more than fuel. It became thought, the ability to imagine what was not yet real, the gift to see what others could not. And that gift still burns. In every artist who paints in the dark, in every thinker lost in late-night silence, in every child who gazes into stars and asks, "What if?" That is the same spark that burned beside the mammoth bones and red ochre walls. It never went out. The storyteller who watched sparks fly. Around the ancient fires, another kind of spark flew. Not from wood, but from words. One voice, then another, then a rhythm of stories carried through mouths and generations. The storyteller wasn't just a speaker. They were a shaman of memory. They didn't just recall the hunt. They gave it shape, gave it meaning. They took the raw material of fear and joy and turned it into myth. Every flicker of flame on the cave wall wasn't just light. It was a stage, a canvas, a sacred place where shadows became gods and silence became story. The storyteller did not hold a spear. They held something more dangerous, imagination. Because imagination is fire. It spreads, it consumes, it transforms. And once lit, it cannot be unlit. Today we still gather, in theatres, in darkened rooms, in books, in the glowing square of a phone at midnight. We still listen, still need, still burn. Because stories are flame passed from one mind to the next, and inside each one a spark waits. Fire shaped our bodies, minds, myths, and still does. Richard Wrangham was right. Fire didn't just feed us, it made us. It softened food, shrank our guts, grew our brains. But that's only the beginning. Fire shaped our fears, shaped our nights, shaped the boundaries between us and the dark. It created the idea of home, of centre, of tribe. It drew us together not just to survive, but to belong. It became symbol of love, of war, of God, of warning, of rebirth. Every torch at a protest, every eternal flame at a tomb, every candle in prayer. These are not just gestures, they're echoes. Echoes of the moment we first gathered around the light and knew we were not alone. Even our language remembers. We speak of burnout kindling romance. A fiery spirit, a spark of genius, a slow burn of grief. Being lit from within, we describe ourselves with fire. Because we are fire, made from stardust, born of heat, carriers of ancient light. And now we stand at the edge of something new. The future, not fireless, but flame-forged. The fire may no longer crackle beside our beds. We may not gather logs or carry embers, but we still carry fire in a deeper way. In our choices, in our ideas, in the way we build and destroy and rebuild again. Our ancestors feared fire, then fed it, then became it. Now we must choose again. Not just how we burn, but why. Because the spark within us is not neutral. It can destroy, or it can create. It can power cities or light a single face in the dark. It can raise forests or bring warmth to the cold and forgotten. The spark in you is ancient, sacred, still alive. So the question isn't, where did fire go? It's, what will you do with the one still burning inside you? The story of fire is not finished because you're still here, and your story, like all stories, began beside a flame. Epilogue. What we inherited. We did not invent fire. It was not born in our hands, nor carved from stone, nor forged in thought. It was here before us, before words, before names, before even memory. Fire was already dancing in lightning strikes, in volcanic breath, in the heart of stars long before our species opened its eyes. And yet, once we touched it, we were never the same again. Fire wasn't just a tool. It was a mirror. At first, fire seemed simple. It warmed, it cooked, it protected. But look deeper. Look into the flame, and what do you see? Not just light, but reflection. Because fire, for all its mystery, was always a mirror. It showed us not just what we could burn, but what we could become. We saw ourselves in the blaze, wild, unstable, capable of beauty and destruction. We learned to fear it, to worship it, to wield it. But we never truly controlled it. Because the moment fire entered our lives, it did something strange. It didn't just shape our world. It revealed our inner world. It revealed who we were and what we could become. Before fire, we wandered. After fire, we gathered. Before fire, we shivered and scattered. After fire, we sang and remembered. We huddled around flame, not only for warmth but for meaning. The shadows it cast weren't just tricks of light. They were visions, memories, warnings, hopes. Fire showed us what was possible. It dared us to dream of more. With every meal cooked, our brains grew. With every story told, our minds stretched. With every predator repelled, our confidence grew. And soon we no longer ran from the wild. We stared it down. Because of fire, we became something new. Not just animals that survived, but beings that remembered. We became the ones who returned to the ashes and asked, "What happened here?" We became the ones who stared into the coals and whispered, "What else is possible?" The flame was not our invention, but it became our invitation to become something more than bones and breath. We did not invent fire. Let that be clear. We did not invent fire. We stumbled across it, in awe, in terror. We borrowed it. We begged it to stay. We learned to carry it like a sacred ember across the continents. Others before us felt its heat. Birds navigating smouldering forests, apes fleeing volcanic blasts, predators prowling the edges of flame for charred scraps of bone. But none of them looked into fire and saw a future. Only we did. We are not the creators of fire. We are its students, its storytellers, its servants, and sometimes its victims. But once we touched it, once our hands reached toward the flickering light, we stepped through a doorway no other species had crossed. We no longer lived in the moment. We began to live in time. Fire taught us patience, the waiting of the ember, the feeding of the coals. It taught us memory, how to find dry bark, how to build a flame in rain. It taught us hope, because fire, once lost, could still be found again. And above all, fire taught us transformation. Wood became smoke, stone became blade, meat became nourishment, clay became art, metal became empire, ash became myth. Everything we touched we reshaped with fire at our side. And in doing so, we reshaped ourselves. We became creatures of potential, no longer bound by what is, but drawn toward what could be. Fire was not merely survival. It was the first technology of becoming we were never the same again. Something changed in us. Forever. The moment we cradled fire not just as heat, but as story, as spirit, as possibility, we became more than flesh. We became legacy. We began to leave signs behind. Charred bones, blackened hearths, ashen caves, soot on ceilings, and stories etched in stone. We began to mark our existence not just in footfalls, but in flame. And even now, in this age of satellites and circuits, you can still feel it. In every candle lit for the dead, in every campfire that brings strangers close, in every strike of a match on a cold morning before the sun has risen, that memory returns. We are the species that touched fire and remembered. We didn't just survive, we made gods from fire. We made cities from embers. We made wars and symphonies from the same spark that once cooked mammoth meat in a cave. We are complicated. We are dangerous. We are luminous. Because we still carry that original flame. What we inherited. This is what we inherited. Not just the knowledge of flame, not just the tools it brought, but the responsibility it demands. We are descendants of the first flame keepers, the ember carriers, the dreamers beside firelight. And now the world burns again. Not in sacred warmth, but in wild rising heat. Not in stories, but in sirens and smoke. The fire we once cradled now cradles us in return too tightly, too fiercely. We inherited fire, but we also inherited its burden, to balance creation with restraint, to light the way without burning it down. To remember what we are capable of and what we are responsible for. Because if fire is a mirror, then we must be brave enough to look into it. To see not just our brilliance, but our shadow. To see not just our past, but our future. To ask, what will we leave behind in the ashes? And what will we still carry forward in flame? The final ember. There is one last ember glowing in the dark. It lives not in the hearth, nor the reactor, nor the engine. It lives in you, in your hunger, your questions, your courage, your memory. That ember has no name, but it remembers the first spark, the warmth of the first circle, the first story told beneath stars. It asks for nothing but to be passed on. So feed it, guard it, and when the time comes, give it to the next dreamer. Because fire is not what made us human. It's what reminded us that we already were.